Good afternoon, everyone. We have a few more minutes to go before we're scheduled to begin. So if you can just wait patiently, we are just making sure that we have as many people as possible entered into the webinar before we get started. But we intend to start at 12:30. Thank you for your patience. Okay, it's 12:30. I see that people are still coming in, but we'll get some of the housekeeping out of the way while those guests are arriving. Um, Welcome to the History of AIA New Jersey, Part 1, 1895 to the 1940s. Today we have a presentation by Joyce Scatuccio, Associate AIA. Joyce will be reviewing for us the first part of a three-part series of webinars that will be presented to give you a reflection on the past history of AIA New Jersey. It's a wealth of information. I hope that you all enjoy it. We have a very large group here today, so we're very pleased that so many people are showing an interest in this, and I think you'll be impressed by the information that Joyce has to share with us. If you were at the AI New Jersey Gala in January, you would have seen a slideshow that introduced some of this information, and I think it's very timely that this is being presented during AI New Jersey Architecture Week 2025, which began yesterday on April the 6th and runs through April the 12th. So there will be a variety of functions that will be organized and run by AI New Jersey and its sections throughout the course of this week to help promote architects and architecture to the public of New Jersey. So this program is worth one learning unit that will be reported to the AIA for all the attendees. So thank you very much for joining us. As I said, this is part one of a three-part series. We hope to have the second part tentatively in October of 2025, and the third part will be sometime early in 2026, perhaps January or February. In addition to those things, Joyce will be making presentations to the sections throughout the state. She has something already scheduled for May for Architects League. She has something scheduled in June for West, and she has something scheduled in September for Central. And she's working with the other sections to make arrangements with them for presentations about their histories as well. So there's going to be a lot of information for you and a lot of opportunities for you to hear from Joyce. In any regard, Joyce obtained her Bachelor of Architecture from the New Jersey Institute of Technology. She joined AI New Jersey in 2003 as an associate member. She was appointed as the Regional Associate Director in 2004, and she was the IDP coordinator from 2007 to 2010. I had the pleasure of working with Joyce when I was president in 2005 in her capacities, and I always found her to be very committed and dedicated, and she was a wonderful benefit to the organization. In 2014, she worked with the Women in Architecture Committee and helped get that started. In 2011, she became a member of AIA South Jersey, and she worked with me in my roles there while I was president. She was our associate trustee at large and events coordinator for many years. She became the section secretary in 2017 and really wears many, many hats for AI South Jersey and has become invaluable to us there. Well, in 2020, Joyce, an avid lover of history, she made some inquiries as to whether or not there were archives of AI New Jersey's history. And there was no official archiving done. And President Stephen Lazarus at the time asked Joyce if she would charter a historic archives committee, which she has done. And since that time, the Historical Archives Committee has cataloged thousands of pieces of information. They've interviewed influential architects from around the state, and they've worked diligently to begin cataloging this history for us. And I think you'll find that through her hard work in combination with committee members Alina Stravinsky, Paul Bryan, most notably, that they have really started to get a lot of good information for us. So at home, Joyce works with various religious education programs. She's formerly involved with the Lyme Disease Association and Lyme Aid for Kids. She lives in Jackson, New Jersey, with her husband Keith, her son, and her two dogs, dachshunds, if I'm not mistaken. So
Yes, that's correct.
I will now turn this over to Joyce. I hope you enjoyed her presentation as much as I've enjoyed hearing from her as she's been developing it. So Joyce, without further ado, it's over to you.
Thank you, Bruce. I really appreciate, and Bruce has been my longtime mentor, so he forgot to mention that because I really appreciate all that he's done for me. Well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate you all coming today. As I said, this is our first of our webinar series, and I have not been able to do this without the Historical Archives Committee. And this is the first of the part one series of three, as we said, of the history of AIA New Jersey. And this is running from 1895 to the 1940s. This is basically the beginning of AIA New Jersey and how we came to be. And since it's our 125th anniversary this year, that we wanted to make this special. So let's get going. All right, so what we wanted to talk about here is that technically AIA did not start originally. It's in 1895. There was a previous organization that was created called the New Jersey Society of Architects. There really is the foundation of AIA New Jersey. And this is all the beginning stages of what the architectural industry and licensure industry is in New Jersey. So this is the very, very founding basis of everything. So in this slide here, we see that in November 28th, 1895, it shows the incorporations of the New Jersey Society of Architects, which was a very small group of men at the time. And their first president was Lewis H. Bloom of Jersey City. Most of the people who started the organizations were from North Jersey at the time. We wanted to just show you a picture of what Lewis H. Bloom is, because it's always kind of interesting to know what these people looked like instead of just hearing names. And Lewis H. Bloom was a very interesting person. He was not only appointed as the first state architect in 1913 by Governor Woodrow Wilson, then became President Woodrow Wilson, but he also was a major architect in the Jersey City area. He did the City Hall in Jersey City, as well as the State House dome and the West State Street wing of the State House. So a lot of governmental work that we see for Lewis H. Bloom. He was 46 years old when he took this position, so he was kind of fairly young. I guess not maybe necessarily young for those times, but young for these times. And a lot of the work he did was like 1895, 1888 time frames. So a lot of this was very concurrent with when the NJSA began. He sadly passed away in 1927. The next thing that we see here is the first thing that the NJSA did was that they adopted a code of ethics. And they wanted it to be, AIA had existed nationally, but they wanted it to be, but it had not, AIA had not come to New Jersey, so they wanted it to be similar to those chapters. In fact, this was modeled after the Boston AIA. And one of the funny quotes I find in the article, it says, if adhered to, it does away with all the bickering between architects and contractors at the expense of the client, and also ensures for the architect fair and just treatment from his brother architects. They also at the time also adopted a seal. But unfortunately, we don't know what that seal looks like, at least at this time. So if anybody does have any information like that we might not know, please, we ask you to contact us if you have that information, because we would love to see it. I'm not going to read all the code of ethics. I put it out on the slide here because I wanted you guys to have it when you go back and if you look at the PDF or so and so forth. But just some of the ones that stood out for me was number 15, which is a member should so conduct his practice as to forward the cause of the professional education and render all possible help to junior draftsmen and students, which we do to this day. And number 7, which I thought was funny the way it's worded, it says, it is unprofessional to make alterations of a building designed by another architect without asserting that the owner refuses to employ the original designer, or in event the property has been having changed hands without due notice to said designer. It is also unprofessional to make the alterations or to complete a building in course of construction until satisfactory settlement has been made with the architect thereof, unless dishonorable practice of insufficient service has been proven. Obviously, a mouthful to say. Very interesting that they were, different than these times, but I could understand the thought process behind a lot of these code of ethics. And reading a lot of these articles back from over a century ago, it's very interesting, some of the language and some of these SAT words, as we say, that are in there. This was just a funny slide I just wanted to put in, and this is my ode to Bruce, because this was the menu of the second annual banquet, and here we see that they had oysters on the half shell, salmon with lobster sauce, and even some things such as Philadelphia squab, fancy cake, and ending with Havana cigars. And I always joke with Bruce because here at South, once in a while, I like to try to have something special, like some lobster if I could, or some special seafood or something. And he always jokes that we have the best food of any of the sections. Then here, what we can see now is that at this point we have that they're getting more political, and they wanted to determine more of NJSA's goals. So here we have that NJSA, which its main thing was to form a guild of licensed architects with state examination. That was like their number one thing they wanted to get off the ground. And as you will eventually see, they did get it off pretty quickly. Other thing was to obtain uniformity in building laws amongst first and class cities within New Jersey, and also to establish a 5% or more on building fees. At this point, we started to have about 20 architects or so that you'll start within the organization. Okay, there we go. So now at this point in 1899, AIA has at this point nationally come to them several times, and they wanted them to transfer over to AIA. And prior to this slide, there is much communication, specifically between their secretary and national, going back and forth. They really weren't interested at first, probably because they were smaller. But a lot of the stuff aligned between AIA National and the NJSA. So I think they eventually, at this point in December of 1899, they eventually decided that they were going to explore the possibility. While that was happening, they eventually, I want to go back. I think I have a slide. Okay, sorry, I skipped a slide there. So this was about the possibility. And then the next slide was that finally in January of 1900, they decided that after a conversation with AIA New York, they were very happy with what they saw, and they decided to provide the opportunity to its members to join AIA. So now here in 1900, we are now in the beginning stages of AIA. But the two organizations, NJSA did not merge into AIA immediately. They were two separate organizations for a long time. Okay. And as you can see, finally in the end of 1900, beginning of 1901, which sometimes the date we consider here in AIA New Jersey as the formalized date is December of 1900 as our anniversary date. But due to multiple things, as for an example, the incorporation wasn't filed until February of 1901, certain dates can be considered your start date, but in AIA New Jersey, we consider it to be December of 1900. The first set of officers were decided as Thomas Cressy, Charles P. Baldwin, Albert Beyer, Hugh Roberts, and Herman Kreteler. And you will see those names go on for many years and how they interact between not just the NJSA, but also AIA. And even though their object of the chapter was different, it was very similar in the same concept to the NJSA. So to organize and unite in fellowship the architects of the state of New Jersey, and to combine their efforts as to promote the artistic, scientific, and practical efficiency of the profession. Finally here, which is I like this piece of information in 1901, we're now in March, that we see that this is the official list of AIA New Jersey members. Now, we currently call it AIA New Jersey. Back then, it was called the New Jersey chapter of the American Institute of Architects. So if you'll note, a lot of times I'll use the term New Jersey AIA instead of AIA New Jersey, at least in this time period. And they list them, as you can see, there's some of the same names that I had previously had mentioned, and their locations. What was very interesting is that Wilson C. Ely and John H. Ely were son and father, with Wilson being the son. And it's very interesting to see that even as far back as this time frame, that fathers and sons work together as architects. We even have some off the top of my head. Of current times, I can think of the Browns from Newark and Suburban, the Salernos from South, and we also have some older names like the Stouts, also from South as well. If anyone knows obviously at the time there's a lot of men, but if anyone happens to know of any of the time frames of a mother-daughter set of architects or a father-daughter set of architects, I would love to hear it, because that would be really fascinating. This happens to be, we wanted to show you a picture of Thomas Cressy. Once again, he was the first president of AIA New Jersey, or we call New Jersey AIA. He was the member of City Hall Commission in Newark, and he designed many buildings in Newark, including the Fidelity Trust Company building and the W.V. Snyder store in Newark, which we have a picture there. In fact, that building, I believe, still exists. So a lot of, thankfully, with a lot of the newer revisions and historical preservation in Newark in the last decade or so, we've seen a lot of historical preservation of his buildings. So I'm really happy to hear about that. This is just our official chapter charter. Now, we have the one thing that AIA New Jersey did have prior to the HArC committee coming on board was a series of framed images like this. And there's only a few, there's only about 4 of them, but this is one of them. And it states that this is the New Jersey Charter, and that's where we get the December 12th, 1900 date from. However, from what we can tell, these were all done at the same time, and they were done because of most likely and framed during when the New Jersey, the NJSA and the New Jersey AIA merged in 1965. So probably as a celebration, they had put all these certificates done, and they all look very similar. Okay, now finally moving on, we are now an official organization. Now a lot to get down to business. So here we have where they're finally now a lot of the things that the NJSA is doing, the AIA is now doing as well. And now they're working together. They're not merged, but they're working together. So first we see is that the main goal is to lobby to pass the proposed bill for licensing for architects. There was some opposition specifically in Newark. There was some legal representation that was taken, but they didn't get very far. And what the other thing that was really great about this bill was that the bill also required the governing of the appointed for the governor to appoint 5 architects for the State Board of Architects. So here we see the creation of the State Board of Architects as well. And each architect had to have 10 years of experience. So usually in other positions, they used to say that they'd have only 2 years of experience. So they wanted, obviously, the State Board of Architects to be very have a lot of experience in their field and be far more educated than what they normally would have in these types of positions. Now we have, I found this was one of the most fantastic articles that I found was the first public notice of the examination, the first ever examination. So the law goes into passes in March of 1902. So the first time they talked about it was 1898. Now we're in 1902, so it took about 4 years to get going. And I guess in the grand scheme of things and politicalness, that's pretty quick. So here we see that this law has passes. Now everyone who wants to be an architect has to be licensed. They want to hold the licensure the test 2 times a year, and they give 3 dates at a time as an opportunity, mostly held in North Jersey. The applicant had to be 21 years of age, and there were, I believe, 8 exams or 7 exams, and they were materials and construction, strength of materials, sanitation, supervision, draftsmanship, rendering, design, and the art of planning. So it's kind of honestly no really different than what it is today. So kind of very interesting on that fact. Now, one of the things that we start to see, this is the very first one, is, you know how our chapter, AIA New Jersey, is separated into what we call sections. There's 6 sections. Well, in the beginning, there were no sections or territorial chapters of what we called for AIA New Jersey. However, there were for the New Jersey Society of Architects. So this is one of the first one we see, which we called the Hudson County Society of Architects. Now, the Hudson County Society, a little tiny section that only had about 20, 25 members. And it eventually got merged into Architects League in the 1960s. But it's very interesting to see this is the first, in print from what we can tell, the emergence of territorial chapters, we'll call them. One of the things, back to the story about the licensure, as everyone was excited in 1902, yay, we're getting licensed, everyone's licensed, this is great. What then we start finding come 1905 is, oh, well, how are we going to prosecute the people who aren't licensed, And in fact, even some of our architects who were the beginning founders of the NJSA and the AIA weren't architects at the beginning. Several of them were engineers, some of them were surveyors. So they too had to go ahead and take the exam to become a licensed architect. So in 1905, we come across that they're having this problem now with what they called bootleg architects. And they felt at first that the State Board of Architects would be the one who would be able to control that and take care of that and prosecute. Well, the State Board couldn't do it. They were overwhelmed. It was too much for them. So they decided to give the authority to AIA, which created a commission to then in turn go after these bootlegged architects and take legal action. And what I found very interesting was first they started, if they would find them, they would go through the whole list of whoever was practicing, they would cross off names, do all the logistical stuff. And then if they found you practicing, they would first send you a letter to say, hey, you could take the exam. It's easy. Here's the fee. Once you pass, you're good to go. You're an architect. And if that didn't work, then they would fine them. And it'd be anywhere from $50 to $500. And then what I was really surprised was after that, they would prosecute them and the final offense would be jail time. So that was really interesting to me to see that they would actually put them in jail. Not for long, but there was jail time involved. Quick, cute little thing is now that it is the 50th anniversary of AIA National, that this was a cute little celebration letter back to National from AIA New Jersey, since AIA New Jersey has only been, it's only been 7 years old now, that just celebrating from the desk of John F. Capon, who happened to be, I believe, the secretary at the time. And we still do, we try to celebrate, obviously, our anniversaries, not only our as a chapter's anniversaries, but also as the anniversary of National. And in 1908, we see the first major architect student competition. This was a very fascinating document because what it did was it explained that they had 1 or 2 smaller local competitions previously. However, they decided this year to open up nationally, and they had 56 applicants, and it went very, very well. It was very, very successful, and that the first 2 people, the first place and second place, I believe, was from Washington, D.C., and the third place was from New York, and they were very, very happy. So this kind of showed the beginning stages of the reaching out through the through the schools and to help promote the organization outwardly to the public. Then we have, which I was floored to hear about this, because obviously at this time there was no in 1911. Princeton University didn't even exist yet because that didn't start until 1919 as far as the School of Architecture. There was desperately a need for education. And at this point, even though people were kind of being trained apprentice-wise, there still wasn't any formal education. So the AIA New Jersey did start an atelier or atelier, and they started it in Newark. And this went on for many decades, actually. And they had two classes, juniors and seniors. They had completed elementary education, which not a lot of people did at that time. And they used the basis of the Beaux-Arts Society, not only for the curriculum, but also for the problems and basically the case studies that they would do. And they would have various seasons of work, and the work would be put on display, and they would have just basically like Studio Today. It was what they did. They had people come in, they had people crit, they had help them learn more, and so on and so forth. So it's very interesting reading this article that nothing really has changed in 125 years, that studio is basically the same, it's just in a different setting. And then in 1912, we see that AIA New Jersey is approving of the Radcliffe Bill, which basically states that they want a appointed state architect, and they're very happy that this happened. Once again, they're very politically involved right off from the bat. And this is another stepping stone to the foundation of our architectural industry. And as we mentioned before, Lewis H. Broom he wasn't maybe the first state architect, but he probably was the second. We don't know if he was, it started in 1913 as the first one, and it was maybe the law was passed in 1912, or that the fact that, maybe he was the first state architect. That part we're unclear. Then the war hits. So now, World War I. So now what does AIA do? So the federal government asks AIA New Jersey to create what they call the Committee of the Preparedness. And what it is to basically silently review all their members and determine who has the skills and who would be proper to serve with those skills of architecture within the military. And then that information is passed along to the government if asked to serve. And the committee was able to serve, where most of these people went was in the service of the construction department of the Engineering and Aviation Corps. They did go on, and this article talks about a lot of other things that they did during that time. They were still concerned that there really was no School of Architecture in New Jersey. They were concerned about some other legislative items, but obviously the war was the main thing, and with a lot of young men out of the country, this was a concern. Remember when we had talked about the chapters, or what we now call sections? First we had Hudson. Now the next one, and this kind of makes sense considering everybody was in North Jersey, the second section, or what we call chapters back then, that was started was the Society of Registered Architects of Atlantic City, which was the precursor of AIA New Jersey, and their approximate founding date is 1919. And what we want to explain is, just going forward, a lot of this information is very fluid. As we find more information, things might change, but from these founding dates, they're approximate, which is as the earliest documentation at current that we can find that states of when these sections existed. And a lot of them were different sections that merged together that now became the 6 that exist today. But we'll go through that a little bit over the course of the rest of the presentation. But this was very interesting since I am a South person. The first president was William B. Rhinebeck, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And I was really excited that we were able to find a picture of him. And AIA South Jersey had multitude of different terms of their section. You know, they were, as we say, the Society of Registered Architects Atlantic City. Then they were also, you know, we were also like, you know, the Atlantic County Society of Architects. So there was multiple names. In 1923, we also see the start of the Central section, which was at that time called the Trenton's Architects Society. And W.A. Poland was their first architect. And there's a picture of him as well. Loving the mustaches. Now, this is the first time where we see Princeton College has been established in 1919. And they come to the NJAA and the NJSA and talk to them about their course of study. But it's still at that time was only a postgraduate only program. Now in 1925, we see what we call the Camden Society of Architects gets created. And that's what we call AIA West Jersey now. And their first architect was a very prominent architect. His name was Arnold H. Moses, and there he is. And he was also the president of AIA New Jersey. Here we see the first documentation that we can find of the Newark chapter. So what Newark and Suburban used to be two separate sections or chapters. There was the Newark chapter, which we see in 1928, and then Newark, and then the Suburban section, what they call the Suburban Society of Architects, was in, we only see around the start is 1937, so that came a little bit later. And once again, those bootleg architects, they're still creating problems even as late 20s happen. And also in the same year, we see the start of the Architects League of Northern New Jersey. And I have to say they have, thanks to Paul and many others over there in Architects League, they have one of the best archives of any of the sections. And we thank them for many of the wonderful pictures. And this is one of them. And this is the group of all the charting members from the Architects League. So that's why we use this as our cover for this presentation, because this was just a stunning image to have. I wish we had something like this for the first, 10 people of AIA New Jersey, or for the first 20 people of the New Jersey Society of Architects. In this article, we talk about that the state, or the architects urged the state to pass the bill, Bill 95. Which basically is the measure to it's basically to the state board to supply a seal. So this is now the first time we see the seal and signature to coming into existence. So now we have licensure done. Now we have the sign and seal. So this, thankfully, as we all know, was passed, and that no other than registered architects with the seal could practice architecture. Here, this is the last organization that we seem to be formed, which was the Monmouth County Society of Architects, which we now call Jersey Shore, and they were in 1934. Their president was Ernest A. Arnid, but unfortunately, I could not find a photo of him. So if anybody knows a photo of him or any information about Jersey Shore, it would be greatly appreciated. We are trying to put our presentation together for Jersey Shore, but we have a little bit lacking on information. So anyone out there who is part of Jersey Shore, please contact us. So this is the the earliest map that we have, we believe, we don't have this exact date, but we believe it was the 1930s. I know it's a little bit light, but it then goes to show the 8 sections besides Hudson. And you could read all the names there. The chapters were not placed on county lines like they are today. Hudson chapter did not become part of Architects League until 1969. And just so that you get an idea, this little section here was basically the Hudson chapter. But for some reason, we're not sure at this point of why we don't see it as being necessarily a part of NJSA. It might have been, and we just aren't seeing the information. However, we do know that there were some other architect organizations that were not part of the NJSA. They were not part of New Jersey AIA, and they existed for a short period of time. Like there was, for example, the Passaic County of Architects. So I'm not sure why there were these extra little groups around. Maybe they just didn't particularly like, what NJSA or New Jersey AIA had to offer or some of their things, but, it happened at that time. So now we're into the 1930s. And what we found during this time was that there wasn't a lot of information, and probably because of the fact that it was the Depression, it was probably a lull in building. And they do talk about membership being on the low, but that it was steady. And they did have, I think, about at this point, at least 1,000 members. So it was pretty good considering with only 30 years under their belt that they had obtained so many. So I just wanted to provide you some imagery of some of the people who were part of this organization. You'll start to see some of the names again repeat themselves. This is Kenneth Dalzell. He was president between 1935 and 1937 of both organizations, because at this point, in 1916, the two organizations ran simultaneously, as well as their officers were the same to make things more organized. And we'll see that in the next coming slides. And once again, their goals were to establish minimum charges of various grades of service, strengthen licensing law, and revise their bylaws. This is another very famous member. Not only was he on multiple committees, he was on he was the director, what they called, what they called trustees now. This was Marcel Villanovia, and he was also president of AIA New Jersey and the NJSA in 1945 and 1947. And as you can see, this man he lectured all over the state. His name pops up everywhere, and he was very involved in many, many different things, and he was from the Oranges. Then as we talked about before, in 1962, the two organizations merged as far as officers. They did not merge as an organization, but they merged their officers together to streamline things. And at this point, the NJSA, as we had seen before, became what they called a mother organization of 8 local associations. Arthur B. Holmes was the president from 1937 to 1939. But at this point, they wanted to really focus on reorganization and to consolidate the different chapters. So you'll start to see after this some consolidation as things go on. And since now we're coming out of the 1930s and there's less, they're trying to build back the economy. They want to build membership, and they also want to provide more publicity for the architecture profession. Sadly, at this point, as we said, Arnold Moses, who was a very prominent architect from West Jersey and what they call the father of West Jersey, and he was also president in of AIA New Jersey in 1927 to 1929. There looks some like there's some overlaps in our data. We have West's data states that he was president for West between 1925 and 1928. And then AIA New Jersey's data said that he was president of AIA between 1927 and 1929. So I guess it's possible he could have been president for both over a year, but I doubt it. So we just have to determine which information is correct. Unfortunately, he passed away, and the organization wanted to do a memorial plaque to him. And the plaque was unveiled in the lobby of the County Tuberculosis Hospital at Lakeland, which is no longer there. And it was designed by Moses. And in this image, it's kind of hard to see the picture of Moses in the plaque, but that's his daughter. And then the gentleman is the president of West Jersey at the time, Clarence McNeely. So now we get back into trying to, of course, we jumped from 1940 to 1947 because World War II. And between those times, the only thing that we really see is maybe some exhibitions that happen. New Jersey, in both organizations, they would combinedly have a lot of times exhibitions, primarily at the Newark Library or sometimes in Trenton. And then they would a lot of times put on art pieces or architecture pieces or renderings. And I would really love to see that our organization does that more. South Jersey did something like that pre-COVID with West Jersey, and it was very successful. We only had it for one meeting, but it was very lovely. And I'd love to see that, for us to have more overly facing things to the public so that the public can actually see our work. I know we have a lot of stuff online, of course, but something sometimes physically is a little bit more, you take in a little bit more than you do online. So back to 1947, now the war is over, and there's all these veterans are home, and it's a massive push to build. But there's a lot of massive federal controls, and AIA is insanely upset, and they want things removed. So it found this statement: it has become self-evident that the remaining wartime and more recent restrictions governing the building industry on the part of the federal authorities are in the time of peace seriously curtailing the building of home for returned veterans, and likewise disrupting the entire industry as well as the normal economy of these United States of America. So one of their recommendations is that they wanted to change the ceiling prices of building materials, because the building materials are very scarce, and they wanted to bring in more building materials into the market. And they also wanted to remove the cost limitation of $10,000 on veterans' homes, which I believe was more about a loan issue with the GI Bill. And one of our last slides here was from 1948, which is now the massive push to start a school of architecture of New Jersey. Now, yes, there was Princeton, but they wanted a state school of architecture, and it was incredibly important to the organization, because one of the massive things that they were seeing was when the GIs came home, there was not enough proper schooling or courses anywhere in the state of New Jersey to properly train. And these architects were finding that when they were hiring these draftsmen, or what we call now associates, they were not properly trained, and it was so frustrating to them that there was a massive push to now start a school. But a lot of legislation had to change, and in addition, they had to have funding. So they originally wanted to establish a school in the School of Architecture at Rutgers. That was their initial intent. And Robert J.L. Caden was the president at the time, and this was his proposal. We did see, as I said before, this was a concern back in as far as 1917, but this was now the main push. This was their next thing to establish the next line of the architecture industry in New Jersey. And I found this statement very funny. It says, complaints have been received from many members of the profession regarding the pitiful caliber of the GI graduates from private drafting schools in the Newark area now seeking employment in architects' offices. So if you come to part 2, you'll see what ends up happening. I'd like to thank everyone. As I said, part 2 will be from 1950 to 1980s, which might be considered the golden age of AIA New Jersey and the NJSA. And we look forward to having it in October 2025. And we'd just like to thank once again, the Historical Archives Committee. And without them, this research would not be possible. And please, if you have any information, documents, images, anything that you would like to share, be it electronically or physically, we would love to have it. We'd love to hear your stories. Anything that you can provide in any time frame, we are willing to take a look at. And you can contact us at AIA New Jersey Historical Archives at gmail.com. And we wish AIA New Jersey a happy 125th anniversary. Thank you.
Joyce, thank you very much. That was a great presentation. We really look forward to the follow-ups to this. Look to see where some of this stuff headed. If anyone has any questions, they can enter them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. That's the best place to get your questions in. If you have them, there are a couple there now. Joyce, one of the guests at the presentation observed that there weren't any women in the pictures, and they wanted to know when women architects were able to join the AIA, if you have any history on that.
Yes, in fact, we never saw any kind of information as far back as 1900 saying that women couldn't join. There was no one thing I did find very interesting in the 1902 public notice of examination, it specifically said that any woman or male could take the exam. So women were allowed to take the exam as far as back as 1902. It's just a question of we didn't see anybody. There might have been members, but as far as the names we have that we've seen in the articles or the leadership, there were no women as far as that period of time. In part 2, that's when you start to see the women become leaders. And that's where you'll see more and more women, and especially in the 60s and between the 50s and the 70s, that's when the transition really happens. But I have found articles of women architects, but not in New Jersey. I found some in New York and in other areas, but unfortunately, I haven't found any yet. But that doesn't mean that they aren't out there. I just haven't found them yet.
Well, I'm sure you'll find it if it's out there. So, and yeah. Joyce and I were discussing this before the presentation, and I brought to her attention the work, the recent book that was published on Louise Blanchard Bethune, who was the first woman architect in the AI at a national level, and she practiced up until 1913. She was born in 1856, and she practiced up to 1913. And one of my colleagues from my time on the Strategic Council wrote a definitive book about Kelly Hayes McAloney, FAIA, wrote a definitive book about Louise Blanchard Bethune's life, and that's got a lot of information. So I'm sure Kelly probably has a lot of history on that, and I'll point Joyce in her direction so that we can get that. So let's go to a couple of the other questions that may be here. One of the questioners asks if you can use AI, LLM data search apps to find more missing history. Are you familiar with that, Joyce?
No, I am not, but I will write it down. Could you say that again?
They're asking if we can use AI, artificial intelligence,
I have
LLM data search apps to find more missing history.
I have done some AI data search apps. And I haven't done it a lot. It's possible. I'm not saying it's not, but the stuff I have found was wrong. So once again, it's the AI has to learn from what's out there. And so a lot of this information, for an example, a lot of these articles come from newspapers.com, which is a subscription service. So the question is does the law AI learn, is able to learn from things that are behind paid walls? In that case, it might be more difficult. But I'll definitely take a look at this and see what else I can find. I mean, like I said, we're always open to, if anybody has a really great website. I even found a few new ones last night. Anything like that, we'll take it, because any research that we can find, and when you have, it's like genealogy. When you have three or more pieces of information that point you to a direction, and those pieces of information are pretty legit, then you can say definitively that that piece of it, that date or time or thing happened, is more likely to happen than if you only had one piece of information to determine that of a date. So the more piece of information you have to determine a particular topic is better.
So Joyce, I'm going to come back to this most recent question later. Earlier in your presentation, very early on, you mentioned first and second class cities. Can you talk a little bit
Yes.
about the difference between those two?
So the first and second class cities is basically based on population. The first class is, at the time, the first class cities was considered 150,000 people or more. So obviously like Patterson, Trenton, Newark. And then second class cities would have meant between 12,000 to 150,000 people. So obviously it's a really huge range. So being from Jackson, we're 60,000. So we would have been considered a second class city. But obviously under the article didn't mention it, but I would assume under 12,000 would be considered like a third class city or village or whatever, how they would have defined it. But I think
Okay.
the reason why they wanted to define the zoning regulations and the building regulations for those two is because you had the most population in those areas, and probably the third, under 12,000 would be a lot less people, and I guess it would be, more spread out.
Okay. You talked about in a section, you talked about the working on regulations and a push for removal of federal regulations. Do you know if this was a universal push that AI National or the national organization had started, that AI New Jersey grabbed a hold of and just promoted within New Jersey, or was this something that the New Jersey representatives started to spearhead themselves? Does any of that come out of your research?
Yeah, it was a federal push. It was a federal push that AI New Jersey wanted as well. There was a couple of instances where there was a federal push from AI National, and then New Jersey, went to their political representatives and then went from there.
And one of the early slides about the formation of the New Jersey Society of Architects talked about delegates to the national convention that was held in December of that year. And I think that shows the importance of representation of within the organization, not only locally but at a national level. Does your history point to some more of the involvement that our members here in New Jersey had on the national stage?
Yes, in fact, um, I in fact, from the very beginning, from 1900, that went from AIA becoming within New Jersey, they were delegates sent every year to Washington, D.C. to this convention. And as far as one of them becoming like up on the national board, I didn't see anything at this time, but that might be because maybe they were just trying there was a few of them in the beginning, so maybe they're just trying to get New Jersey off, off the block there. But they started, in fact, we had, and I'll briefly give you a little tease about all these, big time conventions we had between the 50s and the 80s, these 3-day massive conventions. We don't see them anymore within New Jersey. But their anniversaries would always go back to say that we had conventions in New Jersey all the way back to 1900. Now, I never saw these big time conventions during that time frame, but I think what they probably did count their convention is when they would have these annual banquets, like we saw on the menu.
Okay.
So they would have an annual banquet. Maybe that was what they would consider their convention for that
Okay.
year.
We only have a minute or two left, and there was one question that we didn't from the guests that we didn't ask yet, and that is when did AIA New Jersey enter the national awards and recognition programs? Did you come across any of that in your research yet?
The awards I don't think started until later, until probably after World War II. Because like I said, majority of the research at this period was more about getting the organization off the ground. Part 2 is when you'll see the awards, the conventions, the social gatherings, the Beaux-Arts balls, all those more fun stuff, and more recognition of architecture, where this webinar is more about the beginning stages of everything.
Okay. Well, great. So thank you very much, Joyce. We're up against the hour
Yep.
here.
Thank you,
It was a
everyone, for
wonderful
coming out.
presentation. There were a lot of comments recognizing and how much people enjoyed this. So thank you very much. I'm certain that people are looking forward to the follow-up part 2 and part 3. Again, October 2025. Tentatively, and then early 2026, maybe January or February, and look for presentations at your section level of the history of your sections. So again, Joyce, thank you very much. This was very informative, and I think everybody had a great time.
Thank you
Thank
very
you all
much
for
for
joining
everyone
us
for coming.
today.